The narrow alley was dimly lit by lamps that flickered against the damp brick walls. Rain had fallen earlier that evening, leaving the pavement slick and shining under the yellow glow. It was the kind of street most people passed by quickly, never really seeing it, because it didn't have stores, cafes, or anything inviting. It was just a passageway between two main roads, usually silent except for the hum of distant traffic. But on this night, something different was happening. Inside a makeshift shelter of torn cardboard boxes, two children sat close together, their faces pale and tired. They looked as though they had been waiting for something, though they could not say what. The older child, a boy perhaps 9 years old, tried to look brave. He sat with his knees drawn up, his arm protectively placed near his younger sister. The girl couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. She clutched a piece of rough fabric, worn and dirty, as though it were a treasure. Her big eyes stared ahead with a quiet sadness that only children in hardship carry. Down the alley, a woman walked briskly, her steps careful as her shoes tapped against the wet stone. She wasn't someone who would normally take this route, but she had just finished her shift at the small diner where she worked and wanted to save time. Her name was Claire. She wore a simple white t-shirt under a black apron, with a faded red leather skirt. Her blonde hair was tied into a neat bun at the back of her head. She carried a small bundle of food wrapped in paper, leftovers she had been allowed to take home after a long day serving strangers. Claire had grown used to the rhythm of her days, working long hours, saving every dollar she could, and going home to her modest apartment. Life wasn't easy for her either, but she managed. Yet tonight, when she saw the children huddled against the wall, her heart jolted. For a moment, she stopped walking. She could have passed them by, like so many others did. She could have told herself it wasn't her responsibility, that she didn't have enough to spare. But when she saw the way the little girl clutched that scrap of fabric, pretending it was something comforting, she felt an ache deep inside her chest. Slowly, she knelt down, her knees pressing against the damp ground. She unwrapped the food bundle, revealing a small portion of rice and vegetables topped with golden strands of shredded carrots. It wasn't much, hardly enough even for herself, but in that moment, it felt like the most valuable thing she had ever held. The boy's eyes followed the movement of her hands. He didn't reach out immediately, mistrust had been carved into him by too many harsh days. But his hunger betrayed him, and his lips parted slightly as he stared. The girl, still silent, glanced at the food and then back at Claire with cautious curiosity. "It's not a lot," Claire whispered, her voice soft but steady, "but it's warm. Please, take it." She held the plate closer, her arms stretched out, offering what little she had. For her, it wasn't charity. It was instinct, an unshakable pull to share what she carried. Behind her, footsteps echoed. A tall man in a dark tailored suit walked down the alley, his presence commanding. His polished shoes clicked against the stones, and his gaze fixed sharply on the scene ahead. His name was Daniel, a businessman who rarely allowed anything to slow him down. He had no reason to be in this alley either, but life has a way of drawing people to the same place for reasons unseen. Daniel noticed Claire kneeling with the food, her expression filled with compassion. He noticed the children, their fragile forms pressed against cardboard for warmth. He stopped walking for a moment, something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Normally, he would have dismissed the scene. His world was built on contracts, meetings, and carefully calculated moves. But the look on the woman's face, and the way the children stared at her offering, pierced through the hardened layers of his routine. The boy hesitated, but then, slowly, he extended his small hands. His fingers trembled as he took the plate from Claire, as though afraid it might disappear. He passed it carefully to his sister, letting her take the first bite. The girl clutched the food with both hands, her eyes brightening just slightly as she tasted something warm and real. For the first time that evening, a trace of relief flickered across her face. Claire smiled gently, though she felt her throat tighten. "It's okay," she said softly, "you can eat it all." Daniel watched silently, his mind wrestling with thoughts he couldn't quite put into words. He had grown up in comfort, never knowing hunger like that. He had been taught to value success, to keep moving forward, to never look back. But something about the simple act of kindness unfolding before him unsettled him in a way that felt necessary. The alley was quiet, except for the faint sounds of chewing as the children ate slowly, savoring every bite. Claire stayed kneeling, watching them with patience, making sure they knew she wasn't in a hurry to leave. The light above cast a warm glow over her, highlighting the sincerity in her expression. After a long pause, Daniel finally spoke. Do you know them? His voice was deep, carrying the weight of authority. Claire turned slightly, startled by his presence. No, she admitted honestly. I just couldn't walk past. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the scene. You gave them your food. Claire nodded. It's just a small meal. But it means something to them. Probably more than it does to me. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't know what to say. He had spent years in boardrooms, winning arguments, sealing deals, and convincing others of his vision. Yet here, in a quiet alley, a woman with nothing more than a leftover plate had shown more power than he had ever displayed in his empire. The power to care. The boy looked up at them both, his lips trembling. He wanted to say thank you, but the word felt too fragile, too small for the weight of what he felt. Instead, he simply held his sister closer, making sure she was safe as she ate. Claire stayed with them a little longer, her heart heavy with questions she couldn't answer. Where were their parents? How long had they been here? What would happen to them when the food was gone? She had no solutions, but she knew she couldn't just walk away and forget. Daniel sensed her thoughts, though she didn't speak them. For once, he felt compelled to act, not because of profit, not because of reputation, but because the silence of the alley demanded it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. I know someone who can help, he said quietly, more to himself than to Claire. He dialed a number, his voice calm but urgent as he arranged for a local shelter worker to come. He had donated money to charities before, but always from a distance, through signatures and transactions. This was different. This was personal. Claire glanced at him, surprised. She hadn't expected a stranger in a suit to stop, let alone help. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. There was no need for many words, the look they shared was enough. It said, kindness matters. As the night deepened, the alley seemed less dark than before. The children, though still weary, no longer looked invisible. Someone had seen them. Someone had cared. And that changed everything. What happened in that alley would not make the news. It would not be written in headlines or broadcast to the world. But for the boy who held the plate, for the girl who clutched her scrap of fabric while tasting warmth, and for the woman who knelt without hesitation, it was a story of hope. And for the man who usually walked too quickly to notice such things, it was the beginning of a lesson he hadn't known he needed. Kindness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it kneels quietly on wet pavement, offering what little it has, and in doing so, it lights up the darkest corners.